How's she going, my son? And welcome to the Warframe, the Plains of Eidolon. It's actually been a little bit since I've actually been on the plains, and I just thought I'd shoot the shit a little bit with you guys while talking about damage 2.5, or 2.5. So damage 2.5 is a system rework they're talking about for impact, puncture, and slash. The three basic types of damage that you find on weapons. Slash seems to be the least affected because it is already amazingly good and doesn't really need any sort of help. But puncture and impact, however, do. Now, they're talking more about tinkering with what the status effect of each of the three types are. And, you know, it's cool that they're going to make puncture, like, scale more, while, what's my mark 2? You know, make the puncture scale more, so that, you know, you can effectively completely nullify a target's outgoing damage, instead of only ever being able to reduce it by 30%, regardless of how many times you apply puncture to a target. And Impact, they were talking about making it a ragdoll, but a lot of people were not happy about that. Oh, shit. So they rescinded that plan really quick. Which I do not blame them for. Excuse me for a second. Have to murder some people. So
the target is in the vicinity, but you need
they're seemingly focused on the status of the weapons at the moment rather than the actual elements, because the elements I find could use some work. Personally, the elements, the physicals, impact, puncture, slash. Slash is in a weird spot because it's really good, but not at what it's supposed to be fighting. Slash is supposed to be really good against the naked bodies of unarmored targets. You know, Corpus when their shields are down, Grineer if you remove all of their armor, and just any flavor of Infested, because they're always just naked anyway. Impact is supposed to be what is effective against robots, because they are actually resistant to Slash. You know, it's harder to cut metal than flesh. And also really good against the shields of targets, instead of being... but it's actually reduced against flesh because, well, it takes a long time to kill somebody if you're just bashing them. You know, versus cutting them open and actually making them bleed and such. But, and then puncture is supposed to be the anti-armor element. It's supposed to be the one that you use against armored targets because it punctures their armor. I mean, basic logic. It's also decent against robots as well, because it actually gets to their inner worky bits, where slashing doesn't. But see, here's the problem. Slash's status ignores the damage chart. So, like, it makes the other two physical elements fairly obsolete. And then it only gets worse once you actually start working with, the other elements, like, you know, the actual elementals and then the combo elements. Especially because armor is such a prevalent factor of this game. You know, everyone and their mother has to focus around armor, because if you don't, it doesn't matter what damage you're throwing at the target, if you're not dealing with their armor, you're just not doing damage. Which is kind of another topic entirely, because armor in Warframe, or at least for enemies, needs to be looked at, because the same system for enemies isn't really good for players. Or, I mean, sorry, the other way around. The same system for players isn't any good for enemies, because with enemies, they keep scaling indefinitely. Now, I understand the point of the indefinite scaling is that eventually areas are supposed to be, like, for the endless mission types, you're supposed to be like, oh shit, we need to leave now. That I understand. I don't think they're doing it the best way possible, though. I don't think making the enemies arbitrarily difficult is the best way to do it, because it makes any time they want to use an enemy that's higher level, a little too punishing for content where it's not supposed to infinitely scale. Like, you know, the sorties, for example.
Take out the surrounding guards. Them is carrying a data mass, and we'll need that to get inside.
I mean, this is particularly egregious and noticeable on missions where you're fighting Corpus, actually, surprisingly. Where you're fighting Corpus, and they have a couple of armored guys, not like their whole army, but some of their guys are armored, meaning that, you know, you're using, let's say, toxic damage, or magnetic damage, or, you know, one of the things you would supposed to use against them, because it's the element that's in the, like, type chart, if you will, that's supposed to work. But you're better off using, or at least having one weapon that's corrosive, or otherwise is really good at removing armor. Because armor is so polarizing in how much damage a target takes, that if you don't deal with it, you're just really screwing yourself. Which is silly, because you're not supposed to worry... Oh boy, hang on. You're not supposed to worry about armor when you're fighting the Corpus, because that's not their gimmick. But, you know, they've made armor, and then all of a sudden, oh look, the problem we have with all Grineer, we're suddenly having with Corpus. Which is just kind of silly. And, you know, not really what you're supposed to be doing. Now, it's a little different with Infested, just because Infested gain armor on a very temporary basis. Because they've got that thing where they've got the one that shoots the bug, that shoots the bees at you, but if it shoots bees at an allied unit, it gets armor temporarily. Which is, you know, is like, okay, but, not quite what I'm getting on about here. So, like, I think they really need to step back and look at what, like, the identity of the weapon, of the physical elements is, before they go and change what they do. Because if they don't have the right identity, you know, you can keep changing mechanics of them, but it's not really going to help anything. Because it's just going to result in confusion, really. And weird, weird, nonsensical situations where, you know, Slash is the best against armor as long as you have a lot of status. Which is really stupid, because that's not what it's supposed to be. Also, you stop shooting the thing. Sheesh. Deal with some posers here.
Hold tight and protect that console. More Grineer are coming your way.
But yeah, like, they need to really hammer home, I think, the actual identity of Impact, Puncture, and Slash before they go and redesign what they do in a mechanical sense. Because if Impact is supposed to be the anti-shield element, make it the anti-shield element. Or, well, the anti-shield physical. Like, I understand they want to keep the elementals more effective than the physicals, and that's fine. Because that's supposed to be the idea, like, because the elementals are the things you mod into, whereas the physicals are usually what you have to start with. Barring pure elemental weapons, anyway. Why am I not dashing? Ah! Fuck. Yeah. But once they get the identity of the items... Or, sorry, the identity of the elements in question, a little more sorted, they can then deal with giving them a proper status effect. If Slash is supposed to be the element that's really good against naked flesh, then have its status not work on targets whose flesh isn't naked.
And take the resources.
You know, so it would always work against the infested, again, barring the bees scenario. But against the Grineer, it wouldn't work, because they're in armor. But if you take their armor off with corrosive or shattering impact or just Warframe abilities, then it would affect... Then it would affect their, you know, it would affect their naked flesh targets. You know, which would make sense. You know, the fact that it is damage over time, that's fine. I mean, what's the first thing you think of when you cut something? It bleeds. If it bleeds, you can kill it. But I think armor should get in the way of that more. Even if the damage ends up being finisher damage, you should be immune to slash procs until you lose your armor. Now, for players, this might be a little hard to do because players very rarely lose our armor. Because there's very few enemies that do corrosive damage. And by the time enemies that do corrosive damage do enough stacks of corrosive to take off our armor, we're probably already dead anyway. So that's a bit of a moot point. And, you know, there's no enemy with shattering impact. There's no enemy with, like, instant armor strip ability or anything, although that could be a scary new threat all the same. You know, like, its Slash's status should be really good against targets that are Slash's forte, naked flesh. Impact should be really good against targets that are, you know, shielded. Because that's one of the things shields that Impact deals with. Maybe the Impact status just does a bunch of extra damage to shields. Maybe it doesn't do anything at all to a target that isn't shielded. Or it just continues to do the, like, light, like, whoa, what hit me? Stagger that it does now. Because, you know, that's not super ridiculous. You know, it's not like Bleed with Slash, where it completely transforms what the weapon is supposed to be able to do, basically. And then Puncture should be something to do with getting rid of armor. Or just bypassing it entirely. Or just doing more damage to armored targets. You know, like,
They won't be able to much longer.
Puncture versus an armored target, you know, it shouldn't work against a target that isn't armored. Or, maybe, you know, maybe it would work against robots too, just because their bodies are basically armor. Because, you know, they're metal. You know. But it would... I like the idea that some people have been throwing around of giving Puncture the ability to do Banshee sonar-like weak spots on a target. You know, literally opening holes in their armor and letting you do bonus damage to them. Possibly making that damage ignore their armor value, assuming we're sticking with the armor system we have now, which I don't think we should, but that's another topic for another day. You know, that'll, you know, if we, assumingly, oh, shit. Assuming we switch that system, or assuming we don't switch that system, rather, we end up with a mechanic that makes the anti-armor physical element actually effective against armor. Imagination that. You know, not to be too saucy about it, but that's kind of what I'm getting at here. The basic rules of what the elements are supposed to do, or the physicals, I should say, of what they're supposed to do, is wrong. And they need to fix that. That's what they should be doing, not just changing what the statuses do. Although, if they're looking into making more than 100% status usable, in this, like, as a general functional change of the status system, that's pretty good too. That's pretty good too, because, you know, the fact that we can't, like, orange status, the way with criticals you can orange crit, or red crit, if you manage to crit 3 times in a row. You know, if your crit chance is, like, literally something stupid, like 300% or whatever. Or you just have a Kavat do the thing. Do the cat thing that makes you do lots of damage. We're running, I don't want to run this video too long, and I could go about this topic for a very long time, so I think we'll, cut it shorter here. Maybe we'll just finish the bounty system that we're doing here.
You are nearing the supply caches, but I am unable to pinpoint their locations. You'll have to search them all out for yourself.
Oh, there's one.
Cache found.
But yeah, like, the elements should, or the physicals rather, should do something relevant to dealing with the target type they're meant to damage. Crowd control is fine, because I'm of the opinion that an element that does a crowd control for a status is powerful, because it means, you know, you end up with an element of, you end up with a weapon that doubles as a means of just staying alive, which is never a bad thing. I heard one of them around here somewhere. Concentrate here for half a second. There it is.
Just one cache remaining.
But yeah, you know, and once we deal with the physicals and make them properly do the roles they're supposed to do, then, you know, we can get to the point where we can get the elementals to do what they're supposed to do. Admittedly, the elementals are still in a pretty good place in terms of being useful, because they're so much part of the damage system that is Damage 2.0 at the moment, which is, you know, what we're using. But at the same time, like, you know, again, the heavy over-reliance on armor as a way of making enemies viable, or rather the fact that enemies with armor are, like, over-viable compared to enemies that don't have armor, you know, skews the things that deal with armor too much.
With that last cache, you sent a message to this detachment. Nothing they have is safe.
Again, I'm starting to get into the topic of, you know, armor itself that needs to be fixed. But, you know, if you make the other elements more viable against other targets...
Force them out of their
if you make the elements more viable against the targets they're supposed to be, then people just defaulting to armor-dealing elements will be less likely, because they'll be like, oh, I want to really stick it to the Corpus today, because I'm fighting in, like, Jupiter or something, or somewhere more relevant, probably, like, Phobos or whatever. I don't remember where they go. No, Uranus is near.
The location. Clear out any nearby hostiles.
Pluto is one that's Corpus. That's a high-level Corpus. But, like, you know, you're fighting... Or, you know, you just happen to be fighting the sortie, and it happens to be Corpus that day. You want to... You know, you would want to make it that... Oh, I'm fighting the Corpus. I should be using the anti-Corpus elements. I should be using magnetic to screw with the shields. And presumably screw with their technology as well, because it's kind of stupid that magnetic, you know, fucks with our ability to do special things, but it doesn't fuck with the enemy's ability to do special things. Because, you know, that'd be useful. But, you know, like, you should... And then, you know, gas is really effective because it does toxic damage, which gets past shields anyway, which is another thing that they might have to take a look at. Because I don't think toxic damage, if finisher damage doesn't bypass armor, if it's a bleed proc anyway. You know, if a bleed proc shouldn't bypass armor or shields, then I think toxic shouldn't either bypass shields. It doesn't bypass armor already. But I don't think it should bypass shields because it makes the again, it's doing something the element isn't really supposed to do, which is just ignore shields. Making... You know, it's making the element perform way more jobs than it's supposed to do. You know, it's making it... You know, it's taking too many jobs. And then it's leaving magnetic out in the cold with a cardboard sign. We'll remove shields for food. But no one bothers, because you don't need to deal with shields if you just toxic damage everything. Like, toxic damage, again, toxic damage should be like the elemental that's like Slash. Slash is super effective against naked flesh and, like, infested and stuff. Toxic should be super effective against the naked flesh of things like Grenier and you know, naked Corpus and stuff. You know, not the robots, because the robots obviously aren't organic. And I am probably going to lose this mission. That's okay, I really don't care. I'm just playing the game to have footage in the background while I shoot my mouth off about shit I probably don't even know. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with Warframe's system. Like, it works. It has its weird, like, dangly bits that, as someone who's not a fan of dangly bits in design, I would love to prune off viciously with the biggest pair of shears I can. But, you know, it works. And that's fine. But if we're talking about fixing the system, because that's what we are talking about with Damage 2.5, you know, this is how I think they could fix it. Make every element, be it physical or the actual elementals, do its job properly, and not step on the toes of the other elements that are supposed to be doing their job. You know, like... And, you know, in particular... big culprit of this is Slash, because obviously Slash bleed procs just dominate everything. About the only time they're not super useful is if you're fighting Infested, and they just last with sheer hit points. You know, at that point it's better to use the elements against them, because it just does more damage. Oh shit. But, whoa. Ah, fuck, what the hell? Oh, what the fuck? Okay, that was weird. I think I was just attempting to teenager mode in a spot where it couldn't spawn me in, so it just like, nope. It just kept spawning me out. But it looks like I'm dying, so I'm like, what the fuck's happening? Why am I getting instantly killed every time I try to teenager mode and heal myself? Oh well. But anyway, if you like the video, give it a like, so that other people get a chance to take a look. And if you like what I do, subscribe so you see more for yourself. And when you're subscribing, particularly to anybody, but myself, or when you're subscribing to anybody on YouTube, click on the bell so that YouTube doesn't push them aside in favor of whatever's trending. And... what the hell is this guy? And... you know, look on your subscriptions page if you're stopped seeing your subscriptions just because you haven't watched them in a while. Seriously, where is this guy? What the hell? Can I... well, one way to do it. Might take a while. There we go.
Them out of house and home. I feel bad, but this isn't their house or their home.
But anyway, let me start the endro spiel again. If you liked what you saw, give it a like so that other people can see it too. And if you want to see more of my content in the future for yourself, subscribe. Click on the bell when subscribing so YouTube knows to keep you up to date with what I do. And you know, I feel like there's something more I should say here, but oh yes, actually there is something else I should say. Do comment on videos, because apparently that is also tracked by YouTube. And yet they don't tell us this for some stupid reason. But oh well. But anyway, Warframe, Damage 2.0, talking out of my arse about something I'm not, you know, an expert on by any stretch of the imagination, but as someone who's armpits deep in this game most of the time, I think I have some authority to speak on what I at least think could work better. Respectfully, of course. You know. But to sum up what I've been talking about today, every element needs to do its job, not the job of another element. Are we cool? We cool. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and ciao for now.